Morning, everyone. Good morning. Nice to see you all. So we were. I think this will be the final share on the concepts of, for now, on the concept of Muktza, Masechet and Kiss, as we move to as we move back to just actually learning Gemara, which after all is our goal on this and our learning experience. We saw at the end of the last year basically two models, I think, for understanding Muktza, Masechet, Chisaron and Kiss. One model was that core to the concept of Muktza, Masechet, Chisaron and Kiss is not just that I wouldn't use it for anything else, but I wouldn't move it either. Rashi on our sugya ties it into Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph and Amud earlier, which explicitly talks about the immovability as being an integral feature of it. The Ritva, which we saw later on, says the same thing. So integral to the concept of Muktza, Masechet, Chisaron and Kiss is that one wouldn't move it, in which case that would, in a sense, explain why it has this unique Muktza status of not only not being able to use it, but also not being able to move it, which is unique to Chisaron and Kiss. The second model says no. All that Muktza, Masechet, Chisaron and Kiss means is that unlike other kelim, which even when their primary use is also on Shabbos, nonetheless, if you need be, you would use them for secondary use because they're kelim, they're all omid for any use. Muktza, Masechet, Chisaron and Kiss is not omid for any use. In which case, it obviously is asa Muktza l'sorech gufay, but why can't I move it around? Why is it asa l'sorech makomo? And either the answer is indeed it's Muktza l'sorech makomo, or the answer is there's a trickle-down effect. Since it can't be used for anything else, you also can't move its place because it's so far removed from human use. So just to summarize what we call Model 1, A and B, Model 1 is the essence of Muktza, Masechet, Chisaron and Kiss is that due to the value or the sensitivity of the object, since its primary purpose is forbidden, it doesn't have any, you wouldn't use it for any secondary purposes, in which case it's also l'sorech gufay, is also also l'sorech makomo. Two versions, Model 1A, 1B. Either it's also also l'sorech makomo, because anything which is so removed from human use you can't either move around, or indeed it's okay to move it l'sorech makomo. Model number 2 is no, integral to the definition of Muktza, Masechet, Chisaron and Kiss is not just that you wouldn't use it for anything else, but you also wouldn't move it around, and therefore it's also l'sorech gufay and l'sorech makomo. Now, how this plays out in the realm of Halacha is a little complicated. Would something which you wouldn't use for anything else, but you would easily move around, be Muktza, Masechet, Chisaron and Kiss? That's a very good shaila, right? If the essence of Muktza, Masechet, Chisaron and Kiss is not that you don't move it around, also that you don't move it around, then it wouldn't be Muktza, Masechet, Chisaron and Kiss. Whereas if the essence of Chisaron and Kiss is you wouldn't use it for anything else, then maybe it's not Muktza, Masechet, Chisaron and Kiss. An example of that actually may be these wonderful or terrible devices. Smartphones and the like is perhaps a good modern example of that. You maybe wouldn't use it for anything else because they're quite sensitive and so on, but you clearly move them around. The whole point of them is that you move them around easily, unlike a valuable sakin shalmina, ismal shalmina or something, which you wouldn't move around other than for its use. So that's one sort of shaila that emerges from this formulation. A second shaila that emerges from this formulation is could you have something which is only immovable, but not that you wouldn't use it, not that you don't use it for things. So it's a keli which is mutter to use on Shabbos for its primary purpose, but nonetheless you wouldn't use it for anything else, or it would be immovable. So the example we gave is a very delicate vase or something like that, or a very delicate crystal cup. You might use it for its primary use, which is perfectly mutter on Shabbos, which is to drink from, but maybe you wouldn't use it for anything else. Does the concept of Chisaron and Kiss make sense in that case? Could it be not Muktza for its primary purpose, and nonetheless be Muktza for all its secondary purposes, and therefore you couldn't use it for anything else? The unique exclusivity, the longs of Chisaron and Kiss is that it's exclusive for its primary purpose, and it's Muktza because its primary purpose is Muktza on Shabbos, and therefore it's considered Muktza for any other use. Does that concept make sense when its primary purpose is Mutter? So you could say, yeah, its primary purpose is mutter, but it's muktzah with respect to any other uses. Or you could say you've misunderstood the whole concept of Chisaron kiss, Muktza machmas Chisaron kiss. If it's got a use on Shabbos, which is perfectly mutter, which is its primary purpose, then it's not set aside out of human use, and therefore the concept of it being Muktza for secondary uses doesn't make sense. It by definition isn't Muktza for its primary use. Again, that's something that emerges from this. And we saw classic examples of this, perhaps in the context of Yom Tov. For example, a sucking shel shchita on Yom Tov you're allowed to shecht. Would a sucking shel shchita be Muktza machmas Chisaron kiss nonetheless, because you wouldn't use it for anything else other than shchita? Or no, only on Shabbos is a sucking shel shchita Muktza machmas Chisaron kiss, because you're not allowed to shecht during the week. But on Yom Tov, when you're allowed to shecht, then by definition it couldn't be Muktza. So there's a number of nafkaminas. We saw even a shaila in the Lashon of the Gemara. So there was a machlokas Rashi and Tosfos about sakina dashkavta. So Rashi says it's the sucking shel katsovim, the blade of butchers, the knife of butchers, and the chopping board, the chopping blades of butchers, which is not obviously muktza on Shabbos. I mean, you can cut meat. Sorry, not chopping, cutting. You can cut meat on Shabbos. So maybe its primary purpose, in Rashi's understanding, is actually something that's mutter on Shabbos. Nonetheless, it's banned from it's hooked to medato for secondary uses. And maybe that's why Tosfos is happier with understanding it as sucking shel shchita, which is a shchita knife, which is a better example. Or maybe not. Maybe this sucking shel katsovim, this blade used by chopping blades by butchers, is muktza on Shabbos because you're not allowed to do schor on Shabbos, and therefore butchers don't operate on Shabbos. It depends whether this is a professional tool only used by butchers, in which case maybe it would be also because you can't chop, or you can't sell things on Shabbos. So those were I think some of the some of the sort of shilas that we saw that emerged from this. And those are some of the nafkaminas that came out. I'm just trying to think whether I mentioned to you all the examples. A crystal cup, a knife of shchita, and then there's various sources about this which I won't go into. For those interested, there's a debate around this. So again, just to summarize, that's the case of a Muktza machmas Chisaron kiss, where it's forbidden, where its primary use is mutter. Can you be muktza it for all secondary uses? Then we have another scenario of something which is kli melachot leheta. So a completely mutter kli, but you are miyachid mokum for it. Could that become Muktza machmas Chisaron kiss? So again, just to summarize, we saw two models of what Muktza machmas Chisaron kiss means: either exclusivity in terms of function, or as Parashi, also that you're miyachid mokum. We've now spoken about exclusivity in terms of function. Does that make sense only where the primary function is asa? Or can you have exclusivity of function even with the secondary function? That's Shaila number one. Shaila number two is in Rashi and the Ritva's model, since we have two features of Chisaron kiss that you wouldn't use it for anything else and you wouldn't move it around, could you have something which is a kli melachot leheta, perfectly usable, you would use it for anything else, but nonetheless you wouldn't move it around, it's fixed in its place. So would that be muktza? So I think Aaron, you asked about stuff that you put away. That's not what we mean by miyachid mokum. Miyachid mokum doesn't mean that something has a place. We all tidy things up and put things in a place, but you wouldn't move it around unnecessarily. The kli melachot leheta, would the concept of Muktza machmas Chisaron kiss apply to that? Yeah.
Is that about miyachid mokum?
So that's a very, very good example. Yes, that is an example of what we're talking about. Pictures on walls, generally, you wouldn't use for anything else either, though, because perhaps they have a certain fragility to them. But maybe an ornament which is tough, but nonetheless, you're miyachid mokum, you wouldn't move it around because its point is to be an ornament, would be an example of that. So if you have, I don't know, a stone or something like that, a very strong stone, maybe, but you wouldn't nonetheless use it for anything else because of its value, like a diamond or like, maybe that would be an example of that. Straightening it. Yes. No, you did express your shadow clearly. That would be an example of perhaps it would be muktza to straighten it on Shabbos. And indeed, that's the consensus of the poskim. No, it may be more than miyachid mokum, because it may be there that you wouldn't use it for anything either. Because no one, because pictures are relatively flimsy things. Besides being miyachid mokum, it may be that you just simply wouldn't use it for anything else. I've never met anyone who would take a picture off the wall and use it as a paperweight. It's just not the sort of thing that we use because it's relatively fragile. It's not the sort of thing that gets moved around. So it may be more than just miyachin makom. But if you have an ornament which isn't fragile, then maybe that would be an example of that category of Muktza machzor case, where all it has is a yichud makom, but nothing else. Yeah, no, maybe I'm sorry.
I was going to say, isn't there something about the fact that it's fixed to the wall that makes it Muktza rather than? Is that the same thing as the yichud makom? Okay,
so that's a fair point. Also, there may be another reason why you can't move it around, which is besides how we operate, how human functionality, there may also be concerns around boner and the like with fixing things to walls, because it really goes the other way around though. Since we leave pictures there permanently, arguably you're adding to the structure of the building rather than merely happening to put something there. So you can happen to put something in place that wouldn't be boner, but where you're hanging it on the wall, maybe since we leave pictures there, that enters also into the realm of boner. Yeah. Exactly, you can hang your coat on the wall because it's not fixed there. Maybe you can't hang a picture on the wall because it's a structural element. Yeah.
So the case with the picture that was bothering me is during Friday afternoon, and the room's being cleaned, the picture's taken off the wall and put on the dining room table. In the rush before Shabbos, you forget the picture. Shabbos comes in, it's on the dining room table, and the question of whether you can move it off the dining room table because you need the dining room table. So
right.
It's historically colliding with historic fulfillment.
Yeah.
It's not quite as typical.
So first of all, this is a very thorough clean. I'm very impressed. But that's like, yeah, I mean that would be the shayla. L'chora, if it's not l'chora, if it's Chisaron kiss, then you wouldn't be able to take it off the table, and it would be wouldn't be mutter l'soch mekomo. I've said something interesting linked to this question actually. If you look in the classic poskim, this actually what I'm showing you now is back in the day when someone got married and they were still learning yeshiva, it was understood that they would say a shtickle Torah through during their Shavuot week. And what I'm saying now is something I said in my Shavuot week many years ago, decades ago now, around this shaila, which is when you look in the poskim, there is an assumption that you'll see how this gets back to you in a minute. There's an assumption that paper is Muktza machzor kiss. Very, very interesting. So paper used to be a luxury item, and no one would use paper for anything other than writing on. You wouldn't waste paper on anything else. And writing on paper is also on Shabbos. And therefore you have a classic klisha melachot, Muktza machzor kiss. It's a klisha melachot because it's writing paper. And it is Muktza machzor kiss because you wouldn't use it for anything else other than writing. Paper's easily ruinable. It gets very easy. If it gets moved around, it gets creased and stained and so on. And therefore, it's considered by the poskim to be a classic example of Muktza machzor kiss. Does that concept still apply nowadays? So the simplest understanding is no. Paper, we no longer have such respect for paper. And maybe if you have embossed, high quality paper with little threads in it, like a sort of quality paper, that would apply. Even relatively cheaper things. It's quite an important point, this, by the way. Chisaron kiss doesn't always have to mean, Chisaron kiss simply means loss of money. It doesn't have to be something super valuable. If you have blank thank you cards or birthday cards, they may not be particularly expensive as individual items. Nonetheless, you just simply wouldn't use them for anything else because they are fragile and are easily damageable. So it's possible that even nowadays, the concept of Chisaron kiss applies to paper, even though we do relatively casually use paper. We have paper towels and tissues and serviettes and toilet paper and so on. We very casually use paper. A paper towel or a serviette or tissue clearly is not Muktza machzor kiss because it's dedicated for a mutter use on Shabbos, which is mopping up spillage or blowing one's nose or whatever it may be. However, that clearly isn't Chisaron kiss. But if you have luxury paper, good quality paper, even if relatively cheap, each sheet of paper, even if you have your own personalized paper, is relatively cheap, you wouldn't use it for anything else, and therefore that would be Muktza machzor kiss. Now, it's true if there was an emergency and you simply had no other paper in the house, you maybe would use it to mop up a spill and so on, but that doesn't take something out of Chisaron Kiss. In an emergency situation, maybe you would use your valuable crystal vase as a paperweight if you had absolutely no choice. That doesn't make it ceasing to be Muktza Machmas Chisaron Kiss. Okay, what about paper like cheap printer paper? So it's not even a birthday cards paper, blank thank you cards papers, which you wouldn't use. It's just printing paper. So the intuition would be that this is not Chisaron Kiss. I don't think the intuition is necessarily correct, because even with printer paper, I think it is clear that it's. Let's delve down into the lomzus of Chisaron Kiss. Another way of thinking about Chisaron Kiss is that the secondary purposes contradict the primary purpose. Normally, a keli is omed for secondary purposes because you would use it for it's omed for any secondary. A keli means it's my servant, it's my utensil, and I would use it for any secondary purpose. If the secondary purposes contradict the primary purpose, then I wouldn't use it for secondary purposes. Normally, that's because it's a particularly fragile or valuable thing, and therefore I wouldn't do it. But I think with printer paper, any secondary use by definition contradicts the primary use. Because even with printer paper, if it gets crumpled, it can't go through the printer. It's true that I may choose to repurpose it and use it for something else relatively casually, but I don't think I would naturally repurpose it for any non-writing or printing use other than in relatively extraordinary circumstances. So I think printer paper also l'chora would be counted even nowadays as Chisaron Kiss, even though it sounds quite counterintuitive, the view of the postscript that paper is Chisaron Kiss. So just to summarize, in the past, paper was considered a classic example of Chisaron Kiss. Nowadays, where paper is cheap, that superficially sounds wrong. However, when we delve a little deeper, it is clear this doesn't apply to tissue paper or paper towels, or whatever. That's obvious. On the opposite extreme, I think it applies to dedicated, specific paper like thank you cards and like, even though any one thank you card may be quite cheap. And I would argue that I think it even applies to printer paper, since even to this day, the secondary purpose contradicts the primary purpose of Muktza Machmas Chisaron Kiss. So I just share that with you as an example of, so you leave paper on your table, right? You're tidying up, you ran late on an Erev Shabbos, you come to set the table and you see that you've left out your paper on the table. I think that could be an example of Chisaron Kiss. You can spread the tablecloth on top, but maybe it's not so simple to move the paper. Someone shared with me the following story with the late Rav Falk, the posek from Gateshead. He was the guest, the scholar in residence at some form of retreat or Shabbaton of the sort, and there'd been a series of shiurim on the Friday, and they turned up at the room that was dedicated as the shul. So this was a Shabbaton that taken over a hotel or something, and there were lots of rooms there that the group had rented. And one of the rooms was used on Friday as a lecture hall or whatever, or there was some tochneh taking place, wherever it was. And the room had also been specified as the shul on Shabbos. They put Sefer Torah there and so on. And they turned up Friday night to daven. It was a winter, so Shabbos barely started, just about starting. And or whenever they turned up on Shabbos, and there was paper scattered around on the tables and pens. So Rav went around picking up all the pens. So that feels very counterintuitive. Shabbos, right? And he's casually going around picking up all the pens. So someone asked him about this. He said, "Klishim lachtel isa, so makomo. We need a place to put Asadurim down. Mutter." So someone else helpfully tried to step forward to begin tidying up, and he began picking up the piece of paper. So Falk said to Muktza machmas Chisaron Kiss. It's also the Makomo, right? Muktza machmas Chisaron Kiss, as we just learned. So, okay, that was his view that even nowadays paper is Chisaron Kiss, even paper that you write on. It's true. Again, I want to emphasize the point. You would very, very easily take a sheet of paper, a cheap sheet of paper, and just use it for your shopping list, or to scrawl a note, or to sketch, or to doodle on. We do all these things. It's not Chisaron Kiss in the sense of valuable, but all the use that we do with it is Muktza use, is for writing. And any alternative use contradicts its primary use. So it's true that we have shifted since the postscript in the 1800s that wrote about paper as valuable. Nonetheless, Rav Falk's argument is that it still remains, I'm speculating, I didn't discuss this with him, but the argument say it's Chisaron Kiss is it still remains Chisaron Kiss because its primary use is still contradicted by secondary uses, and therefore it's not omed for any other use, unlike a regular key that's omed for any use. So he was of the opinion of Chisaron Kiss, and he said he stopped the people picking up the papers because he held it was Chisaron Kiss. I mentioned that to you just how in a sense counterintuitive halacha me if you don't understand it. I think most of us would feel a great deal of hesitancy to go around picking up pens because it's clearly Muktza, and maybe wouldn't think anything of shuffling around pieces of paper in order to take them. If the paper had been printed as source sheets, again, clearly it's not Muktza because its primary use is a heter use, which is something with information written on that we want to read. It's true that any other uses are contradicted. You wouldn't use a printed piece of paper to mop up a spillage, but its primary use is non-muktzah and mutter on Shabbos, and therefore it wouldn't be muktzah machmas and kiss. But a blank sheet of paper, Rafal was of the view that that is muktzah machmas and kiss because of this formulation. So I mentioned that's a more common scenario of leaving chisaron kiss on table, or maybe not, maybe pictures on the table. But anyway, that's a scenario that, yeah. Okay, so that's a clarification of chisaron kiss. I want to just all okay? Yeah. Okay, I just want to conclude then with really one more ha'ara on Chisaron Kiss, which is someone asked this. I think Adam asked it though. I have to be careful about saying people aren't here today, otherwise as ADO pointed out, I'm eternally naming and shaming not being. But Adam is listening online, not live. The question of whether foods and the like can be Muktza, machmas, chisaron kiss. So I don't want to go too far into Hilchas Muktza, but already in the Beis Yosef we saw that there's a number of reasons for what we colloquially call Muktza, and not all of them are really identical, and there could be nafkaminas between the two. We've successfully ducked and dived and avoided going too much into the different reasons for Muktza, and that's been deliberate because the sukkah is overwhelming enough as it is, and there's a Muktza and a quasi Muktza known as Gezeras Kedim of Nehemiah and so on. There's complications around this, so I'm going to avoid all of that, other than to say that this is a slightly inaccurate oversimplification. But for our purposes, we can ask a simple shaila, which is: can something which is super usable become Muktza machmas chisaron kiss? Is that relevant? So normal kalim have a certain degree of use. There's things which are considered as far as possible from Muktza, which for example, let me explain as follows. There are poskim who have the opinion, and there may be some ramification of this in practical halacha, that even a klisha melachot leheter, one shouldn't just flippantly move. Even though it's not Muktza at all, it's a klisha melachot leheter, nonetheless one shouldn't just move it for no reason whatsoever. This doesn't apply to super useful things which are casually moved the whole time and are completely immersed in human use, such as food items or the like. So the poskim discuss, and I sent this on the WhatsApp group as a late notice maramokum, whether food items can become Muktza machmas chisaron kiss. And the easiest example of that would be a food which is l'schora, a food which is set aside for sale. Let me give you an example of this. A caterer has food supplies, or a shop has food supplies. Would that be Muktza machmas chisaron kiss? Since they wouldn't use it on Shabbos, it's only for schron. You can't just go on Shabbos. An alternative example of this could be a very fancy food item which you're not planning to use on Shabbos because its use doesn't make sense to use on Shabbos. For example, an elaborate birthday cake or something, or a chasna cake, a wedding cake, it's a tiered wedding cake. So the wedding is going to be on Sunday. No one is going to cut into it on Shabbos. It's chisaron kiss. It's a very expensive item of food, and you certainly have no intention of using it on Shabbos. So the Mishna Brura, which I sent over on the Mishna Brura, Shulchan Aruch discusses this, and the Shulchan Aruch says, this is a rule. There's no such thing as food which is roy lachila, which is Muktza Shabbos. Food which is not roy lachila can be Muktza on Shabbos. So, for example, if I have raw meat, so at least in the pre-2000s, people didn't eat raw meat. And nowadays there are raw meats that are eaten, but certainly in the past, or meat that no one would eat raw, you're not allowed to cook on Shabbos. So bishul is also on Shabbos, and the food is inedible, and therefore it be Muktza on Shabbos. This is relevant, by the way, in freezer halachas. So let's say you want to get your ice cream out of the freezer on Shabbos, and the meat is blocking the way. You would have to work out whether this would be allowed or not. How would we paskin probably? Are you allowed to move the meat out of the way in order to get to the ice cream? Sorry. Right, so we'd have to work out what category, and therefore it was whether it's mutter or soch makoma. Absolutely, yeah, spot on. Okay, so either way, the Shulchan Aruch says there's no edible form of edible food which is Muktza on Shabbos, and then he says tomorrow mishkenim mishaperes ha'imdim neschora mutter lachol meimim Shabbos. They're allowed to eat on Shabbos. So the poskim, broadly speaking, are divided into two camps. whether this is because of the nature of food, it's so far removed from Muktza that the concept of Muktza doesn't make sense by it. It's simply not in the class of things about which the concepts of Muktza make sense, or which is the path that the Mishnah Berurah adopts, which is more of a practical explanation, which is there's no such thing as a food which is removed from human use on a practical level, because all foods one would eat if one wished to do so. So a shopkeeper would dip into their supplies, and if you own a K's or Kosher Kingdom, whatever, or Tapuach, and you on Shabbos, some guests come around and short of food, you would pop into your shop and help yourself to a pack of bizli, and you wouldn't think twice about it. That's the real Mishnah Berurah. Now, the nafkamina between these two explanations would be a food which genuinely you wouldn't help yourself to, like this wedding cake. Again, if you were starving to death, of course you would help yourself to it, but that's not enough for Muktza Machmas and Kiss. If there was a danger, you would pick up your fragile glass vase and use it to smash an intruder, right? That's not what removes something from Chisaron Kiss. So if you take the existential route that food simply isn't the sort of thing that can become edible food, simply isn't the sort of thing that can become Muktza, your wedding cake could not be Chisaron Kiss. If you take the view that it's about, because you would eat it kashiyit if you wanted to do so, even though a shopkeeper wouldn't use a utensil, but they would use food because food is more easy to use, then it could be a wedding cake would be Muktza Machmas Chisaron Kiss, akin to schora. A fascinating idea. There's not a clear category that would define it as being Muktza Machmas Chisaron Kiss. So, what's the chiddush of the din of schora? Is it because it's a class of things and therefore is Muktza Machmas Chisaron Kiss, or just because practically you wouldn't? I'm not entirely sure, but definitely, if you crunch the data, you could arrive at halachic views that would say the wedding cake is Muktza Machmas Chisaron Kiss, especially if you're of the opinion that even things which are klishim lachted heta can become a Chisaron Kiss because they're excluded from any other use. So I just presented that to you for your perusal, which is why I put the Mishnah Berurah there, triggered by Adam's appropriate question, which is, can foods be Muktza Machmas Chisaron Kiss? Okay, so I think we'll stop here, and Emir Hashem, on Tuesday we'll actually go further in the Gemara and to engage in normal Gemara analysis. Yeah, I'll send out more sheets. Yes, yeah. We'll just simply go and carry on reading tomorrow. But yes, I'll send out more sheets. Yeah. Okay, I wish everyone a good day. Bye. Bye, everyone.